Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Just trying to go to presentation. Okay. Welcome everyone to the Future of English South Asia Spotlight. My name is Meena Patel and I am part of the core working group for the Future of English project. This is the first of two spotlight sessions on this project mentioned by Stevie Spring in her plenary this morning. Before we begin, can I just say that we do hope to have time for questions and comments at the end of the session. So if you do have a question or comment, just pop it in the chat as you listen and we'll try and address it later. We're very lucky to have two presenters with us today. The first is Amy Lightfoot, who is currently Acting Director, English for Education System South Asia for the British Council. And we're also very fortunate to have with us Dr. Amal Padwad, who is Director for the Centre of English Language Education, Ambedkar University in Delhi, India. Dr. Amal was a participant in the Future of English Roundtable discussion for India, and later on he'll be sharing his insights with us. But for now, I'm going to hand you over to Amy, who will give us a brief overview of the project.
Thank you, Meena. So the Future of English is a multi-stage project which will set a research agenda with global scope, but also with local relevance. And the project is intended to provide insights on trends that will define the role of English as a global language over the next decade, inform language policy and education reform interventions, and lay out a research agenda which is capable of generating hard evidence and data to inform those policy decisions and also to evaluate their impact. In 2006, David Gradle predicted the future of English in his really influential publication, English Next. The English Next publication was commissioned by the British Council, and even to this day, it remains one of our most downloaded and cited publications. The current Future of English project that we're talking about today is planned in 3 phases. The first phase took English Next as its starting point, and it evaluated Gradle's predictions before looking forward to the future and producing a new set of 16 predictions for the next decade. Phase 2, which is the phase that we're focusing on in today's session, comprised a series of regional policy roundtables in which the new predictions that were made by the Future of English project in phase 1 were interrogated and revised. The aim of phase 2 was to gather insights and opinions from policymakers and policy influencers like Dr. Amal, that you'll hear from in a moment, from all over the world, and then to analyze the data that was gathered during these roundtables to help revise and refine the predictions from phase 1. In phase 3, we'll develop new ways of engaging with UK and global experts, policymakers, academics, parents, teachers, employers, students, and also other key stakeholders to track the trends through robust evidence-based data collection and also to evaluate and interpret the trends over time. The Future of English Research Grant Scheme is a central part of phase 3. The aims of the research grant scheme include, but they're not limited to, critically evaluating the key trends identified by the Future of English project, developing new and ambitious methods for measuring and tracking the key trends, and also finding effective means of measuring and understanding the impact on English as a foreign language of greater digital engagement and new technologies. So just going back to phase 2 of the project, in South Asia, we had 3 roundtables. We held one for stakeholders from Pakistan, one for stakeholders from Bangladesh, Nepal, and Sri Lanka, and a third roundtable which was held for stakeholders from India. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Amal to talk to you a little bit about the roundtable in India.
Thank you so much, Amy. I was fortunate to be part of this roundtable because how English is going to move, in which directions it's going to move, is something of immediate and also long-term concern for all of us. Next slide, please. But when we think of the future of English, even before Gradle published his book in 2006, there was another attempt at guessing the future directions of English by him, 1997. And it's interesting that when he published that book, it was originally called The Future of English. But then he decided to add a question mark, because when he completed his study and finalized the draft, he realized that the future of English, especially a very long-term future of English, wasn't going to be all glory and all prosperity. He foresaw some kind of decline in the stretch and use of English. So he followed up with another study, which Amy referred to earlier in 2006, which, as she indeed correctly said, a very, very influential study, which has guided lots of actions and plans and policies in many parts of the world. This book is more important in the sense that it takes a more specific and more concrete approach to various aspects of the use and learning and teaching of English in different parts of the world. Next, please. So in broad terms, some of the trends which the 2006 book predicts and which came up in the India Roundtable as well, were also there in the 1997 book. So some of those trends were visible quite early on, though that was just the time when a fresh wave of globalization and opening of economies was sweeping across South Asia. But even in 1997 book, Gradol pointed out that there would be various standards of English, and those standards would mostly be competing with each other for recognition. He also predicted that the L1 speakers of English would be a minority, and English would be dominated by speakers as second and foreign language. He also predicted that the age and demographic composition of English language learners would change. And in 2006 book, he slightly revises it to make it more specifically around teenagers and adult learners. And he, at that time in 1997, he predicted that the number of English learners would increase till the middle of 21st century. But by 2050s, it would stabilize and even start declining by that time. So those were some of the predictions which continued in 2006 book, which also figured in the India Roundtable. But coming to the next few predictions that came up in the Roundtable, if we could go to the next slide, please. So essentially, these were some of the highlights that came up in that Roundtable. We were all essentially looking at not a very long-term future, but broadly next 15 to 20 years. The changes that we have seen in the last few years have been so rapid that it is difficult to think too far into future. And that's why it's more realistic and feasible to think of a short-term future. And it was felt that one of the important trends for the future of English is to look at where English will be learned, how it will be taught, and in what ways. And it seems that English is decidedly going into alternative sites and channels and resources of learning from the current formal, print-heavy, and conventional ways of teaching and learning. Another trend that seems to be gathering strength is the rise of the corporate and private sector in English language education. And it was felt that there were two main reasons behind that. One, the increasing withdrawal of state provision for English language education. And secondly, the needs and aspirations about English language education going beyond formal qualifications, offering a scope for corporate and private sector to come in a big way and looking at English language education as a business opportunity. Connected with this is also the rise of English medium instruction, because in private sector, that seems to be the most lucrative part of the business, and there is increasing demand for that. Especially in South Asia, over the last 2-3 decades after the globalization and opening of economies, it has become even more I would say, prominently clear that having English brings in power, privileges, and prosperity. And there is a greater awareness among people that they should have more English. So there is now an additional and strongly connected aspect of social aspirations with English. And if we think of social aspirations, then inevitably we also come across the questions of social justice and inclusion. And as Peggy Mohan had pointed out in her article, in some cases, English is directly needed as an important skill or knowledge component. But in other cases, there are also places where English is not necessarily a requirement, but still acts as a gatekeeper to keep some people away, and that's where English is required again. The integration of technology is no doubt one of the most remarkable developments speeded up drastically by the current pandemic experiences. But interestingly, there are two paradoxical things happening there. One is a move towards handheld devices. As figures from India point out, the number of laptops and computers sold is relatively stable, but the number of smartphones sold has increased 300 times, 300%. So India has 20 billion smartphones for globally, world has 20 billion smartphones for 6 billion population, but it doesn't mean that everyone has a smartphone. So there is that issue of digital divide and access as well. Digital technology will come in, but English language education will have to deal with teaching and learning on handheld devices. That's one of the trends which people felt in the roundtable that we are moving towards. As various varieties, including accents of English, are becoming more and more acceptable, there is less focus on discriminating between accents and varieties. There is this issue of standardization, especially in formal education, and future teaching materials, resources, training, and assessment practices will have to deal with this issue. But overall, there was a feeling in the roundtable that the future of English seems secure for at least the short-term duration that we were thinking of. And general feeling was the teaching and English business is going to be on the rise for at least another 2 to 3 decades. So those were the summary indications that evolved in the roundtable. And I'll be happy to hear other people's comments. Thank you so much. Over to you, Meena.
Okay, let me stop sharing. Okay, thank you, Dr. Amal and Amy, for that overview of both of your experiences. What I will do is now I'll look at the chat because we have a couple of questions. I don't know who these questions are from all the time because Jonathan's passing them over to me, but the first one is rise of corporate and private sector in ELE in India. Is this for adults and young learners? And I think that's a question for you, Dr. Amal.
Yeah, thanks for that question. It was for adults and young learners to begin with, if I look back 10 years ago. But in the last 4 years in particular, all age groups, all sectors are being affected by the rise of the private and corporate sector. So today, there are massive operations launched by big corporate houses into English language education, even at the primary level. So even young learners are now included in that, in those offerings.
Okay, great. And that was Jonathan's question, actually. Can I ask a follow-up question, Dr. Amal, to that? So I understand that the corporate sector is rising, and I understand there are opportunities for the corporate sector. Is there evidence that the corporate sector is working with the government together, or are they two distinct entities for India?
I think we have to look that question in two different ways. One is a corporate sector that works through its CSR initiatives, social responsibility initiatives, or via NGOs. There is a greater collaboration between those kinds of initiatives and government. But there are also corporate offerings which are out and out commercial offerings. Nationwide mass scale offerings, which being commercial, the government is reluctant to be associated with for obvious reasons. So in those cases, we hardly see any kind of interaction or collaboration between the corporate and the state sectors.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, we have one more question here, and it's for all of us. Okay, so it says, should we be talking about the future of English or the futures of English? I mean, not just globally, but even in a diverse context such as India, is there one future? Can we legitimately have multiple possible futures? Happy for either Amy or Dr.
Maybe
Amos.
Amy, you can begin.
Yeah, I can start. When I saw the question come up, actually, it made me smile because often we have questions about whether there is a future of English or Englishes, so the plural is on the English. And I think that's something that's been debated for some time, right? About whether, you know, we're talking about one English that is common everywhere, or we're talking about lots of different varieties of English that are used for different purposes. My feeling is probably we're talking about the latter. But to the particular question, I think, yes, I think, especially somewhere like India, as Amal described, you know, the way that English is taught and accessible to different parts of the population varies significantly, not only by socioeconomic group, but also geographically as well. There are different approaches to the education system and how it's delivered. So I think while there will potentially be some commonalities in terms of how English, the role that English plays, I think the way that people experience English and their access to it will continue to be very different. But Amal, I don't know if you agree or you have a different view.
No, I agree with you, and thanks for that question, Jamie. I mean, there is one essential limitation we need to be aware of. When we think of predicting future for a country as a whole, we have to generalize and kind of take a slightly abstracted stand and have uniform predictions for the whole country, which always are very diverse and reach at the ground level. So when we look at the ground level, for example, if we start looking at different sectors as young learners, adult learners, or we look at learners in the urban locations and learners in rural areas, or we start looking at English in technical and professional courses and English in humanities courses. In all those cases, we are essentially looking at a wide variety of smaller minor trends moving in different directions. And in that sense, it will be justified to think of multiple, the plural futures of English. But for a country as a whole, there are certain general trends which widely might hold true for the nation. So in that sense, we think for the future of English. I believe that policymakers and curriculum or other kinds of designers need these kinds of general trends which are broadly uniform only to a certain extent.
Okay, thank you both for that. And Jamie, thank you for the question. We have another question from Dan Henry Gonzalez. And the question is, will we see major stakeholders, such as big testing companies, moving to these future directions of English, such as advocating multiple types of assessment and testing? So
maybe I can.
Oh,
sorry.
go for it.
Yeah.
No, yeah,
no.
Go, Dr. Amal.
Okay. My quick response to that question would be yes. I may not agree with the word advocating, because that means some kind of proactive stand, but they might be responding to the changing market needs as well as the sense of if I can use that word, sense of the customer base or clientele, where now social justice, equality, inclusion things are becoming issues to be considered and addressed. In that sense, if we think of issues like multiple varieties of English, accents of English, not discriminating on that basis, then testing agencies will have to address them via multiple testing types and assessment types and recognition of various Englishes in the world.
Okay, thank you. Amy, anything on that, or shall I go on? No?
I don't think
Okay.
I have anything further to add on that one.
No, great. Our next question is from Ramgiri. Thank you, Dan, for that question, by the way. This question is, in public schools where resources are scarce in South Asia, is there increasing adoption of EMI justifiable or feasible?
So I can start, and then I'm sure Emma will have lots to say on this too. So EMI, English as a medium of instruction, just to be clear about that. And I think, yeah, it's a great question, and one that is, you know, there's so much to say about it. And I think this is something that applies, as Ramgiri has said, you know, across South Asia, not just in India. And it's an area that we have done quite a bit of research in from the British Council too. I think, you know, there's definitely a phenomenon of an increase in the attempted, I should say, implementation of English as a medium of instruction in schools, in the public sector, but also in the private sector. In fact, I think most schools, at least in India, which are private, do purport to be English medium. But there are a number of issues around this, not least that what you need to be able to deliver effective English medium instruction is really quite complex, as it is for any language, not least that teachers need to have a certain level of English themselves. The resources available for the students need to be, you know, of a sufficient quality for them to access the language and to develop the skills in the language as well as the subject knowledge. And introducing English medium instruction at too early an age, for example, at primary level, can be quite problematic. And this has been borne out by evidence from many different research studies. So yeah, I think I can understand the drivers for it. I think that governments, in particular state governments, are under some pressure because they see some parents moving children out of the public schools and into private schools because of the sort of pool of English medium and the promise of them being, you know, developing skills in English. But there are dangers there, because I think in order to do it, as I said, effectively, there's a lot to put into place before it can be done well. I will just put in the chat for Jonathan to share a link to our position paper on English medium, which you might be interested to have a look at if you haven't seen it before. But I'll pass over to Amal for his comments on that too.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah, I basically agree with you, Amy. But I would look at this question in two ways. At a very early stage for young learners, EMI, in my view, is not justifiable, even if there are resources available. And in higher education, EMI may be justifiable provided there are adequate resources available. In addition to that, I also would like to suggest a more nuanced look at the term resources itself. When we are thinking of young learners, primary school children who are sent to EMI schools, we typically think of resources which the schools have. But for a young child at the primary stage of education, having a good family background where English is spoken is also an important resource. And in that case, at least there is some likelihood that English medium instruction would be a bit effective. So resources in that sense, social resources, community resources, cultural and historical resources, those are also important aspects if we are thinking of EMI at a very young age.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm just checking for more questions. Hold on. Okay, so Ram, thank you for that question, and I hope you're happy with the answer. So, Dr. Amal, when you presented, you talked about the rise in the use of smartphones in schools and generally by young people. We have a question here from Cheryl, and it says to both or either of the presenters, what impact might technology have on the use of English in South Asia?
In my view, it's going to be a very complex impact. And there are so many strands of that impact that it is difficult to guess in what ways and in what directions that impact is going to evolve. Tentatively, I feel that number one, because the technology comes with access to lots of alternative resources, students are going to be less limited to the classroom and the textbook and the teacher, and would be using lots of alternative resources and also ways of learning. And that's going to affect, I mean, at the moment, I see a problem there. Those teachers, I mean, immediate problem from my colleagues and my friends around me and even myself. Those teachers who are aware of these alternative things available to students and take them on board in their own classes and their own teaching are kind of creating a synergy between what the learner does in the classroom and does outside. And those who are not aware of this or ignoring those things, then they are creating an additional pressure on the learner. So learner is kind of living in two worlds, a classroom world and a world outside. So the kind of English that person gets in the classroom and the kind of English that person gets online, there is no match, there is no synergy, there is no interflow between them. Second thing I believe is the opportunities technology offers need to be brought in by the teacher in terms of materials, in terms of methods, even in terms of expanding assessment. This is going to be a big challenge for teachers and teacher training and teacher education, because I don't think the current generation of teachers is going to retire for another 10 years. I'm thinking of the mid-career teachers, and they haven't begun their career with any exposure to the modern technology. There have been massive changes in just 10 years. So reskilling and redeveloping our own knowledge is a huge challenge for us, and that's going to impact teaching and learning for the next 10 years at least. So a kind of very tense situation, I believe.
Yes, and I absolutely agree with Amol. I mean, I think that whole point about integration of technology into other, face-to-face classes, I think is really key, and having skills to do that. I do just want, there's just two other points. I think one of the challenges is that the amount of content and different, types of technologies and apps and whatever else are available now to teachers and students. And I think navigating through that and deciding which ones are good and useful and which ones are, not going to give you anything is really difficult, because, you're faced with all this stuff. It's hard to make decisions about it. And I also just want to go back to a point that Amol made about when we were talking about, the opportunity for EMI and the need for parental support, and that. I think it's the same with technology. You have to have opportunity to communicate using an app, and learning vocabulary and grammar is one thing, but having opportunities to share and to discuss and communicate and use the language in a more kind of natural way is really critical. I don't think people will be able to develop language skills properly unless they have that opportunity as well. So the technology alone, I think that's what I'm saying, is not, I don't think, ever going to be enough to skill people up to the level they need.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, both Amy and Amol. We have one more question. Jonathan, I'm just going to ask you, do we have time for it?
Probably need to wrap up now, Meena.
Okay,
Sorry.
can I just say then, Krishna, who's just put a question in the chat, what I can do is I can go to a discussion room and I can meet you there, and we can answer that question about the study of the future of English, if that's all right. In that case, can I say thank you very much to our participants who engaged by asking questions, and thank you so much to both Amy and to Dr. Amol for being here with us today and for engaging by answering the questions so rigorously, I think. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody, and thank you, Jonathan.
And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Meena. Yes. And as Meena said, yeah, please. please carry on this conversation in one of our discussion rooms found in our community tab. And also we do have another Future of English session focusing on East Asia later today. So please tune in for that. Oh, and please, if you can, leave us some feedback on this particular session by answering the 2 short survey questions found in the survey tab. Thank you, everybody. I hope you continue enjoying the conference. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye, Amy.